Again, the big story on the night, BYU with their huge win over third-ranked Oklahoma. Dan Sheldon joining us now from the, well, I tell you, I've heard time and time again how amazing the stadium is. Joining us from Texas. And Dan, what an amazing moment when that game came to an end.
The largest dome stadium for sports in the world, Dave, and it was a huge moment in BYU history. The context of it, we don't really know yet because none of the players or coaches could really fit it into context. But if you look at the biggest victory as far as the time frame goes, you have to go back to 1990, and that's BYU over Miami. But that was in Provo. This is a neutral site, but really a road game for BYU. I mean, there were about 85% Oklahoma fans in that building. 15% BYU fans. We actually caught up with, obviously, Max Hall afterwards and Jan Jorgensen, who talked about how quickly they were able to figure out just how well they could stand toe-to-toe with these guys. And then right off the top, you'll see Brian Keel, the former Cougar, really letting it out on the field.
How's that one feel, Brian?
That was amazing. It's the best game I've been to. We just slayed the Giants. And Cougars right here, right here.
I committed to our team, our program, and our staff that I was going to have more fun, and none of it's manufactured. It's been bottled up for a while, and my hope is that the players see I'm sincere about it, the coaches see I'm sincere, and my role is becoming different. I love these kids, and I love to see them have success, and it's hard to show as much emotion when you're thinking about the next play to call, and having that now delegated, it's very liberating, and I enjoyed the game. Maybe more so than I have any game since I've been the coach. And the way the kids played is what brought it out. They deserve the credit. I was just a cheerleader.
We realized that we were moving the football on them, and we realized that our defense was getting stops. And I think our team just built momentum, and all of a sudden we're looking around like, you know, we're right here. We're right here with these guys, and we can play with these guys. So I think that just generated a lot of momentum for us, and going into halftime, we felt like it was our game to win. And we knew that they were kind of getting tired and beat down, and we came out and kept battling and fortunately pulled it off.
They were holding like crazy. If they would have called like half of what they were doing, it would have been that we would have had like 30. Every time I was coming off the field, my jersey was just all over the place, and they would just latch onto you and they would not let go. And so I'm glad what they did call. They deserved what the calls that they got.
So, Dave, you can break it down. There were a lot of quote-unquote heroes in this game for BYU. Max Hall down the stretch, getting it to his tight ends, Dennis Pitta and Andrew George, after those guys were shut out early in the game. McKay Jacobson, of course, with the game-winning touchdown on the defensive side. Well, actually, I'll stick on the offensive side. Brian Correa, who comes in to be the featured tailback because Harvey Ilga can't give it a go. We thought Harvey was going to be 90% before game time, but Bronco Mendenhall, a last-minute decision, decided to hold him out because he didn't feel like Harvey was ready to go. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you've got Colby Clausen, who had a couple clear shots at the quarterback, Sam Bradford of Oklahoma, in that first half. The second to final play of that first half offensively for Oklahoma, of course, Clausen knocks Bradford out of the game with a sprained shoulder. We don't know the extent or how long he'll be out at this point, but that certainly played a huge factor in the outcome of the game. People will say, okay, they were missing Bradford for the whole second half, but at the same time, at halftime, it was still only 10-7 Oklahoma, with Bradford taking all those snaps.
Well, Dan, you could probably shed a little light on this, being a big SEC and a Florida guy, and I realize Florida's on another whole level from the rest of the world, but you have to wonder at what point do people realize, whether it's Oklahoma or we can go back to Alabama in that Sugar Bowl, that the teams out here are able to recruit, line up players, and compete. BYU's offensive line, I would have to say, did a very nice job. You talk about Korea's running. Their defensive line, it looks like they got a little worn down partway through that third quarter. But other than that, they held up strong. When are people and experts going to realize in these bigger conferences that these teams out here can compete, at least BYU, Utah, and probably TCU?
Well, and I think those are the three, and I think right now the perception has to go beyond those three. Can this become a conference that goes beyond the quote-unquote big three to include everybody else, all 9 teams?
Why? Not every
team
team in the
fit into that conversation?
Good.
What's that?
Well, not every team in the SEC is good. Why can't we have some bad teams?
But you could argue that year in and year out there are 6 or 7 teams in the SEC that can compete on a higher level than the top 6. Then hold on, Dave. Than the top 6 or 7 teams in the Mountain West Conference. I mean, it's a deeper conference probably in the SEC. But what we have to look at moving forward is, you look at what happened in this. And here's an interesting stat: Bob Stoops this is the second time during his tenure as the head coach at Oklahoma that he suffered a season-opening loss. The other time, 2005 to TCU, and we know that TCU went on to win the Mountain West Conference in their first year in the league. Certainly this year, BYU now has greater aspirations than just the Mountain West Conference after beating Oklahoma in the opener.
Yeah, well, his 2005 team wasn't as good as this one's projected to be either. Well, maybe the other thought is, too, boy, and I even hate to open this can of worms, but it's probably time for, and I'm suspecting this will happen in the next couple of years, BYU, Utah, and TCU to improve their conference standing, i.e. out of the Mountain West and into some of the bigger leagues. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, who knows if that can happen at this point. I really think that the easiest way, if there's anything easy about what's going on with the BCS right now, the easiest thing for BYU, TCU, and Utah to do is keep pulling off stuff like this. I know it's like, after a while, it's like, how many times do you have to keep picking up victories like Utah over Alabama or now BYU over Oklahoma before they finally say, let us in, let us in. And so at this point, you have to say, keep winning, keep doing this. We'll see what TCU does out of conference in the next couple of weeks. It keeps happening, and somebody's going to take notice, and maybe Congress eventually steps in and actually does something about it.
That you love when the government gets involved. How about this theory, though? The BCS goes to the Pac-10, the Big 10, the Big 12, and says, hey, will you guys please absorb these three teams so we can quit trying to, or being forced to give at-large bids? Just absorb all the good
and I've told you this all along. I've told you this all along. As much as we hammer on the SEC and even the Big 12, right now, as far as the BCS setup goes, it is the Big 10 and the Pac-10 keeping us from getting a playoff or something more inclusive with a conference like the Mountain West. Because they're so beholden. They're so tightly holding on to the Rose Bowl and keeping that to themselves. They don't want to include it in a playoff, and that's what's holding up this whole process.
Well, there's how you solve the problem. You put them in the